Data is beyond a currency. Data is more powerful than anything we've ever seen in commerce in the last 200 years. So if you're going to use data, use it to deliver value, and then you will have satisfied, encouraged customers who will stay with you because you're giving value to their life.
Welcome to another episode of Banking on Air, the official Vacuum Labs podcast covering challenges, opportunities, perspectives, and opinions that matter to the community of fintech and financial services around the world. We're available on all major podcasting platforms, so feel free to search for us on your favorite one. And today, I'm so happy to have Colin Payne from Capgemini here. Colin, welcome. Can you give us a brief overview of your vast professional journey and how you've come to be where you are today?
Of course, Marcel. Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here with you. Yeah, I started early days. I got into banking quite early as a trader. So I was really at the hard end of it and started to understand how global banking worked. Really on the front line, it was in Europe on trading. All sorts of technologies were around me. I was really seduced by the likes of Bloomberg and Telerate and all these amazing machines that gave me feeds from around the world. And of course, I had a background in coding and a little bit of early computing. So I really started to transfer that knowledge and get involved in trading patterns and algorithms. But for me, the trading side lost its appeal, to be honest. It wasn't somewhere that I wanted to stay. And I loved the technology. So actually, it was from there that I started developing new technologies and ended up working, as you said, with Apple for a little while, where we worked on platforms and the iMac and all those brilliant sort of products that came in when Steve came back into the company, mid-90s. And it was the real beginning of customer experience for me, understanding what the reality of that is. And of course, since then, I think history's shown that actually those choices that were made then to produce high quality, high touch, perfect products for people to enjoy and to have an ease of use of, it was really important. And from that, I took that knowledge into retail and back into banking. And my journey's been quite complex, but actually there's a theme, and the theme is really clear. It's all about ensuring the experience is unique and wonderful for the person using the technology. And that's the critical thing that we're in now. We're in this world where it's got to be seamless, frictionless, obviously digital, but it has to also inspire and lead you into what you need to do. That's a brief kind of potted history, Marcel.
You've really touched on a big topic today. Is really the user experience and more specifically the digital user experience that everybody keeps talking about. It's all about how do we make the next pretty app. A lot of the apps in banking today are very similar. Like every time I open up LinkedIn, there's a new, almost a Me Too kind of player who's trying to do something similar to the early players like Monzo with their nice Coral card and Revolut, which came in with a very nice and clean experience. But it's all very pretty, nice and cool, and there's a lot of this digital innovation theater happening. But is this really enough? Is this what is the potential of digital banking or banking in general?
It's a brilliant question. Personally, I think not. It had to go through this process to start to shake down what was important. And you're right, we've got to the point where the user experience is settled now. There's really no debate. And the reason there's no debate is because we're dealing with pretty much boring content. Banking is not a subject area which fills people with inspired thinking and makes them want to switch on their phone and access their bank account immediately. This isn't the experience we're really looking for. I think you mentioned Mondo as I knew them. I was a beta really in the early days, and Monzo as they are now, Starling, others. They understood that there needed to be a simplification of the interface. So the UI, which is what you're talking about, was directed, simplified, stylized. For me, that's interesting because it allows you to access the information in a cleaner, more direct way, which is great. So you have a speed of access and a clarity, which is really important for your bank data. And you've got to remember, when I started, there was the amount of data being mismanaged by the incumbent banks. So that in fact, when you tried to get a statement or you tried to understand where a payment had gone, it didn't exist. You could, the mistakes that were being made were everywhere. So in a way, the new banks and the digital challenges and the technology has allowed us to have correct information at the right time when we need it, which is brilliant. As to now, is that enough? Not really. In a way, it's sufficient for what you need in terms of an interface. But actually what people want is to have all of that go away. They want it to be transparent. They want it to be simple. They want it to be really invisible, actually, because honestly speaking, who of us really wants to engage with banking products? Getting a mortgage, it's not about the mortgage product. It's about buying your home. It's the life experiences behind the products that are enabling them. And I think actually people just want them at the point of need. So if we're shopping, we want to enjoy the experience of shopping and then purchase the goods in the easiest way possible. Simple as that. And we want to be able to have credit solutions that are available to us personally, so they suit our circumstances. Now, all of that's a mile away from where we are now. But that's what I think the real customer experience needs to be. Something that's quite different from what we've had in the past from banks. I think the digital experience, if we just focus on that, is fine. I think we've done great things with digital experience. Those of us who enjoy digital banking have seen brilliant changes in the last 5 to 10 years. But now it's about what does the customer really need? And I think that's a little bit different.
So what does the customer really need?
If you talk about Apple, one of the big things with Apple, of course, we didn't really ask the customer, because the danger with asking the customer what they need is they often don't know. And what they're using at the moment is absolutely their frame of reference. It's a really difficult question to answer, but what I'd go back to is what we believe is that a customer has these life events. They have these moments in their life, and these can be many small moments per day where they have to have financial services in their life. They may not want to have financial services, but they've got to be there. So if you could make it as painless as possible, as seamless as possible, as interactive as they need to have it, but also have it as accurate and as helpful as possible, I think that's what the customer needs. A banking customer wants to be able to offer their data, but they want something for it. They're happy to give consent to use the transaction data, but a bank help them make the best decisions in their life. Can they offer them the right products for what they need at the time? These are all things that customers need. They don't necessarily need a new feature on an app. They may appreciate it in time if it gives them benefit and value. But actually, you've got to remember what banking is for. It's to allow you to save your cash, to invest, and to borrow when you need to. That's really the basis of retail banking. And I think if we're talking about retail customers, they want that to be easier. That's really what they're looking to be.
So one of the things that we now know about banks is that a lot of the cores and a lot of the technology powering them today was built at a time when a branch opened at 9 in the morning and closed at 5. And early on, you could look up your balance or ask for a loan through a website of some kind, but a lot of that would be asynchronous completely. So it would not be connected into a core. It would basically be a marketing site helping you out, or the balance would be from a couple of hours ago, that sort of thing. Do you think right now the banks are technologically ready for those new experiences, those more instant or on-demand services?
I think they're ready for the change. So it's probably a two-part answer. I think what the banks recognize is the need for real-time financial interaction. They certainly recognize that. And I think they've recognized that for quite a while. This is not a new requirement. This is something that's been demanded for years now, probably a decade or even more. I think since the big tech has come in with solutions to platforms that really showed what technology can deliver in real time to people, I think customers have demanded the same of their financial institutions, quite reasonably, I think. And not only the FS institutions, but also the people they pay their bills with. Most people are now on a multitude of subscriptions. When you're doing subscription-based economy work, when you're earning in different ways, when you're receiving money at different times of the month, it's not easy to track all this stuff. So you need something beyond batch processing. And that goes back to my point about customer need, about accuracy, the basics of banking. Get those right, and the customers will be really grateful for you. And what I'd say about the incumbent banks, their legacy systems do provide major challenges in terms of real-time information. So they have enormous amounts of data that's running through them. But in order to accurately pull that data out and serve it to the customer, on the legacy system that's multiple endpoints, multiple integrations, really difficult to get that to work seamlessly. So of course, naturally, most of our clients actually, and most of the people we work with, are trying to find ways to improve those systems, obviously. But for sure, it's about real-time data. It all boils down to that. And unless you can get that real-time data flowing, you're going to find it difficult in 2020 going forward to retain your customer loyalty. Simple as that.
You're working with a lot of clients today and trying to figure out what that next wave is. Of course, the technology problem is there and they need to resolve that. But that's not essentially what will transform them. It will be the application of that technology or the direct application of that real-time data and information and actions that will transform it. The thing that you presented to me was inventive banking. And I love the whole concept. I love the underlying sort of parts of it. But can you give me a high-level explanation of what your vision is here that you're presenting to clients that you're working with them on?
Yeah, of course. We coined the phrase inventive banking just because, honestly speaking, in the market that we operate in, there's a lot of talk around digital. There's a lot of talk around around cloud, open banking. These terms are used almost daily by everybody. So we wanted to create something that had a bit of space around it. Because Capgemini Invent is who I work for, we use that inventive terminology to set us apart, I think. And I really thought hard about it. I thought, what does it mean to invent something? What does it mean to be inventive as a bank or as an insurer? And for me, it was obviously the technology that enables it is fairly straightforward to explain. We're talking about platform-based technology. We're talking cloud native. We're talking plug and play. We've got loosely coupled architecture. We've got ecosystems. And we've got really fast, agile systems and processes. So the kind of wrapper around it, that's not differentiated as far as I'm concerned, because you'll find that quite a lot in Capgemini and in our competitors. So I thought a bit more about it, and I thought what Inventive needs to do is it needs to be always available for the customer. So no matter where they are and what they need, it needs to be able to anticipate their significant moments in life. Mortgages as an example. But if you could use data to anticipate the life moments coming for a customer, it could be at the onset of a family, it could be as they get nearer to retirement age, so many options, but we've got data that can help us do that. We've got first party data, direct obviously from the banks that we work with. And of course, we've got open banking, so aggregation, as well as third party data. And we're quite good at using those kind of social listening tools to augment the data we have. So that anticipation allows you to dynamically tailor products. So essentially, it gives you the right product for you at the right time. Simple as that. And you deliver it as a bank with the right tone of voice to the right person. So that's the basic line of inventive banking. But I don't think that's enough, because that's what I would call the brilliant basics of banking. What I'm looking to do with Inventive is to reach beyond that traditional activity. So when I talk about ecosystems, I talk about links to communities, evolved bundled platforms, and a scale which really could surprise any customer. So these are links to services which are outside of the standard banking products, active communities that can help you in financial services. Those kind of add-ons give value to a customer. And I've learned those lessons from some of the platform work I've done in the past, which I've mentioned. So I've brought that thinking into banking and financial services. And once you've got that as a proposition, the next thing really is to make it invisible. So the last thing I want to do is to launch a cool app which has all these kind of flash features on them, because I'm a customer as well. You are. We know what it's like to have these multiple featured apps. We really don't use them. We use maybe 10, 15% of it. We get into a pattern of use. So why don't we take that away? Why don't we just make it invisible? Use AI, manage the identity that you have, understand your needs more, and then embed the banking in what you're doing. And then what that allows you to do is really unleash the power that you've got of the technology. So think about financial coaching. Think about in a world where we're looking at sustainability as a major task for us going forward into the next decade. Imagine having your own sustainable advisor linked to your banking. It's going to know what you're doing. It's going to know what you're spending. So it links through to your footprint, both carbon and otherwise. So it gives you a totally different societal view of what you're doing on banking. And that's really together what I mean by inventive banking. It's the use of technology, the harnessing of it, the making it completely seamless, completely invisible, but the ultimate coach for your life. So it helps you along as you try to set these goals in your life and just makes it easier for you. Back in the day, it would have been a really good bank manager or a really good financial advisor. I'm sure they exist and I'm sure they're still there. But for me, what I think we can harness is the power of technology to use data to give you the ultimate advisor. And that's really what we're doing with inventive banking.
So what I'm hearing a lot of is data, collection of data, enrichment of data, and then applying it to your communities and then unleashing it onto the many use cases or the parts of the world that are there. And it sort of reminds me of telcos a couple of years ago when they were figuring out that this data thing that they're providing to customers, and in this case, the other side of data, which is providing data into your phone, they suddenly realized that they're now going to be the oil pipeline of 21st century. They're really going to be powering that next wave of communication. And it's really in what you're saying, I'm hearing banks have a different kind of data that they're not really leveraging yet. They have literally something that's what's more valuable than oil. At this point, it's lots of things, but it's really that data. It's the information about you. Not only that, they have identity. They understand who you are. They often understand your family relations. They understand who your spouse might be. They might understand your children, your friends, your communities, because we're sharing our lives with them. When we're going out for beers, we get to share our lives with others, and that data is there. and it's not really enriched many of the times. Companies like Monzo and Revolut have done a great job of understanding those relationships by splitting bills and sharing money and sending money across my sort of social network. But that enrichment hasn't happened yet. Is that the first step for banks? Is it that enrichment and augmentation of that data to moving towards inventive banking?
Yeah, I think it's one of the steps for sure. I'm not sure if it's the first. It could be a bit of a scary one for them because it's a big topic to cover. And the banks that I work with, they are developing data strategies. They are learning to utilize their data in different ways. The interesting thing, though, I'm part of the open banking groups. And the fact of the matter is, what the regulator has understood is that it's your data. It's my data. It's not the bank's data. So actually, what open banking has started to achieve is a democratization of data. And I think that's a really important thing for the banks to understand, because when you move into an aggregated world where that transaction data they sit on can be consented by you and I to be available to anyone. Let's say, for example, it could be consented over to Apple or to any of the social networks, let's say Facebook, if you so were inclined. Now, that presents a big problem for banks because that was, as you say, that was one of their most valuable resources. I think my friend Jason Mauld over at Starling talks about data being the new money. I think it's even it's beyond money. Data is beyond a currency. Data is more powerful than anything we've ever seen in commerce. In the last 200 years, it is the pivot into something brand new and a new interaction between the consumer and the producer. Now, I'm not going to get too political here or even philosophical, but fact of the matter is, for the bank, that privacy that they had and that relationship they could cultivate, which was a relationship of hierarchy, let's face it, in banks. You used to be in a situation where you would approach your bank almost in fear. You were hoping that they would help you. I don't know, since 2008, haven't things changed? And they continue to change. So what data, to me, actually, it represents the ultimate freedom. If you're wise about protecting your data and protecting your identity, and you're conscious of what you're doing online, you have a great power within your data field. And of course, utilizing that with any supplier or any retailer, actually, or any partner that you wish to link with, it's a massive power that you have. So the relationships are all changing. I guess that's what I'm saying is you can't think of data as just a big data lake that you will then enrich with a bunch of third-party information. You'll then channel it through to a marketing campaign, and I will present to Marcel the perfect product for you to buy today. And hey presto, you've got a satisfied customer who will be indebted to you for the rest of their natural financial services life. No, that's not going to happen. What you've got to do is be in real time. You've got to be aware of what your customer base is doing and how they're interacting. You've got to use data to understand what their lives are. You've got to use data to understand where they are currently in that life to help them when they need it and to take advantage for them on their behalf when they can use that. So in other words, offer them great deals on savings, great investment opportunities, those kind of things. You've got to be there to service them because the customers are getting wise to this and it's all about value. So if you're going to use data, use it to deliver value, and then you will have satisfied, encouraged customers who will stay with you because you're giving value to their life. So that's my very long answer to your interesting question about data.
Yeah, an interesting point you mentioned was the sort of portability that now comes with open banking. Because like you said, in the past, you might have had your bank, you might have also almost been scared of going there. Am I going to get that mortgage for the house that I wanted? There's an element of that sort of democratization of banking happening where, yes, the bank can have the information about you. They can, use event detection, things like you just had a child, because they can now detect that you're purchasing things that somebody who just had a child might be, or you just bought a house, even if you bought it with another bank's mortgage. They can detect those sorts of situations. But you also now have significantly more power in switching over to a different provider, a different bank, a different financial services institution that can now give you more with that data. So it's almost, yes, you are much more in control of that data, although now there's more of that being tracked.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting dichotomy. It's the balance between those two elements and getting that balance right. We all talk about the tone of voice that we're dealt with, especially in financial services. I think going back to your example of Monzo, when I first got involved with Monzo back before they were called that, when they were Mondo, I was fascinated by the way they approached tone of voice and communications with customers. And I was blown away by the fact that they would be so upfront, so honest, so transparent, to the point it was unrecognizable as a banking institution, actually. absolutely. And there were moments when I was working with incumbents that I would take some of the material that I was being sent as a beta customer and show these guys, this is incredible. The way they're opening up and using communications as a powerful medium. It reminded me, I've spent a little bit of time in content creation in my previous lives, where the message of the media was really important. And I think Monzo really got that when they've opened up their backlogs, for example. I remember them doing that for the first time. They came to us as customers and said, this is the backlog of features we've got. We've worked through this. These are our top 10 features. What do you think, guys? And they just simply opened the Slack channel. And suddenly you had customers commenting on a backlog. I'd never seen anything like it. This was 4 years ago. It sounds like ancient history now, but I'm pretty sure most of the incumbent banks wouldn't be prepared to open up their potential future features to public scrutiny. And this is the difference, right? And this is where maybe the legacy banks and the incumbents need to think about things in a different way, because I guess we've gone down this yellow brick road and we're really not in Kansas. It's a long way away now. And so in this kind of new environment, it's not sufficient to be behind that machine and be the wizard operating the machine and actually hiding all this chaos behind. Well, open those curtains, work with your customers and start to be real. And I think that reality, that authenticism, it builds the right kind of engagement with the customer base. And then I think you're in a situation where they understand that dichotomy that you spoke about earlier, whether they've got the information or they haven't, whether they're going to use it in the right way or the wrong way. We're pretty smart to that now. We've gone through this with social media recently. We've gone through it with big tech. We understand what these things are. We've all watched Social Dilemma. We know what these things are going on. We understand how algorithms work. Most of us do. So be honest with people. Be engaged. Tell them really what that data is doing for them. And then they can choose whether that's the right kind of engagement for them. That's my personal view. I think that, again, is inventive. That's a way of thinking which is new, it's fresh. It makes a difference to a customer.
Absolutely. Like a few episodes back, I had Dominic Pim out of Up Bank in Australia here. And what I loved about them is they're basically a group of geeks who wanted to build a bank. And they're approaching the way of building that bank in exactly the same way that they would build any technology product. And one of the things they did recently is they opened up their API. People can now come to their bank and say, we are equal to you in both my data and the actions I take with that, not only data, but the money I have with you. And you have the same level of security that you would have normally within any sort of banking institution. However, you are now so empowering the customers to build their own use cases around their lives, as opposed to saying, oh, our focus groups have told us that you will need this product, which I'm not saying that cannot work for specific use cases. However, like actually opening this up and really seeing Dominic talk about this was really gratifying that this is now happening in the world. It's really interesting. In fact, we ourselves as Vacuum Labs are involved in one of these first spin-offs that are working in the US. We're going to be focusing on the LGBTQ or LGBT plus market, launching our own bank, our own bank-like institution, Greenfield build, a very specific community with services very much focused on them and supporting entrepreneurs in that space. So it's really augmenting that world with services that date as opposed to generic ones.
I'm thrilled to hear it. The idea of focusing services where they're needed and then responding to a customer group. So we talked about, I suppose we were talking about data in terms of hyper-personalization, the segment of one. I don't believe in that myself. I just think it's too expensive, actually, to service a segment of one. I just think I can't even imagine a time when it can be possible. But the brilliant thing about what you're saying is you've identified a community who have broadly similar interests and needs. Fine. It used to be that banks would segment their communities by how much money they had, how old they were, blah, blah, blah. Nothing that has any relevance to anybody, because compare me to another person similar to me, we're going to be totally different. That community focus, it's got to be the future. So for me, it's really good to hear. Really good to hear.
Yeah. We first met about a year and a half ago when we spoke about our vision for a certain level of tribalism in the positive sense that is needed in banking and financial services, because we might be part of multiple tribes, I dare say, in our lives. We might be fans of specific sports, specific hobbies. We might belong to a certain minority of some kind in a specific part of the world where we have shared problems and shared issues, whether it's systematic or just through time. Certain groups have been disadvantaged in some way or form, maybe through pure coincidence, just because there wasn't a focus on it. But now with the advent of banks as a service, payment platforms as a service, we can now start building these on top of this infrastructure technology that even 10 years ago just wasn't there. And now we're seeing it even in the US with community banks expanding to a new sort of layer or new type of community banks that are very niche and not just offering a better car loan.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. It was interesting. I chaired a panel with a lot of different people, some people from PayPal, people from Compris, the French retailer, and there was a representative from Manchester United. And it was fascinating because for me, you just mentioned a sports team. I live in Barcelona. Obviously, I had to discuss things in football in very broad terms because I couldn't really speak to them about Barcelona. But the guy from Manchester United was really fascinating because he was talking obviously about post-COVID. The changes to their income, of course, have been massive. So I think they had an announcement the day before yesterday, and they were talking you're talking astronomical loss, 500 million, a huge change for them. But what was really interesting was focusing on the fan experience and how they're going to get out of this into a digital world where they're going to have to think about football in different ways, certainly in the short term or medium term. And he was, in a way, what you were saying about the community thing. What's going to save them, of course, is the strength of their community, the strength of their fan base. And I said to him, can you imagine any bank having fans in the sense of, actually in the sense of Apple fans? There are brands around the world that have fans. You know what? I the only ones I really think can genuinely say they have fans are the new challengers. You have a fan base around Revolut. You have a fan base around Starling, and they're quite active. Some of these customers are really quite active within those consumer-based fan groups. You see the kind of voice of the customer coming through loud and clear. Don't see it so much with the incumbents, funny enough. It's a bit more difficult to find the fan base there. I'm not going to mention any names, of course I can't, but it would be interesting to look into that and see in the future, how can you identify your fans and bring that advocacy back into the work that you do? I know you and Michael do some brilliant work in this side, and I think more power to you, because I think that's the right methodology and the right trajectory for banks to serve their particular customer need. Because it goes back to your first question. How do we know the customer need? We have to know what they are first. We have to know what the customer is. And then we can start to talk to them about what they need. And they'll pretty soon tell us. That's the thing. And once they tell you, you've identified the need, just serve that need.
Yeah. I'll use the term tribes again, is you can very much see it with football, soccer fans, that sort of space. These people live with those identities. It's part of who they are, or whether it's a part of their pride of the city that they live in, whether it's pride in the group of friends that they grew up with, that they go to work with. It's a joint passion, and it's extremely strong. And there we'll probably find lots of examples like this, specific types of lives that larger banks, incumbent banks, or even challenger banks can't really cover, because that's not the life of a regular person. But as a group, they're fairly massive.
Yeah.
And this really is something that I see as we move forward. We don't necessarily need to see another app from, let's say, Barclays, but we might be interesting to see somebody like Manchester United partner with somebody like Barclays and say, if you have that account, it's easy to subscribe to a video on demand service right now within COVID, where they can watch the matches, even if the stadium is empty. A telco can come into the mix with additional benefits like data that is free for those matches. Lots of these unique experiences can be built, but it's really, right now, I think it's a level of putting together those business cases that make sense. And right now, with the infrastructures being built, we're hopefully going to see that in a few years, where the cost of running that infrastructure on the bottom, whether that be for Barclays or somebody like Railsbank, which is a provider in the middle of themselves, the numbers will start to make sense even for football fans or football clubs.
Yeah, I take you back to when your first question about inventive banking, that second area around augmentation.
Yeah.
I briefly said it, but it's all about linking communities. It's all about using platforms to evolve those communities. And the surprises come very quickly. And I think the good thing about technology at the moment, that orchestration layer that we advocate, we use people like MuleSoft, that you'll be familiar with, as our orchestrating layer. We help them develop Anypoint and have rolled it out to people like HSBC with the absolute prime intent, being able to then simply use the API as a channel, if you like, to a particular type or segment of society, of a community. And if you then take it to its logical progression, you'll create marketplaces that are suited to those communities. Those marketplaces will be self-selecting. And of course, you can change all of that digital interface to suit your tribe or community or whatever you want to call it. Suddenly, you can tribalize your experience very easily using data. You could surprise the person by understanding what they... Imagine if you could have the relationship with someone who identifies in a certain way, and you can subtly correspond to that. You can have a conversation conversation which engages in a much more direct and understandable way. So this is humanizing banking. That's what it boils down to. For me, I did a series of lectures where I talked about banking on being human. And this to me is the ultimate objective. Not so much getting a segment of one, but so that your bank can speak to you in a way that you appreciate as a human. It feels natural, it feels helpful, it feels in tune with your need. You're not going to be perfect. It's not going to be, and in fact, we always say, and I'm sure you do, perfection is the enemy of good enough. It certainly doesn't have to be perfect, but good enough to have a conversation with your customer that resonates. And as soon as you can resonate, you can start to build those relationships. And it's just about being human. So with all this enormous technology, AI, everything else that's going to be around us, we're going to have to figure out how to harness those to be human. It's going to be the real holy grail of what we're trying to do. Once you don't know it's a machine, once you understand that it's understanding you and vice versa, then you have a different relationship. And I think that's what we need to try to get to.
Would you say that making banking more human or humanizing banking is actually about bringing back community banking? Is it about that community? Is that the core of it?
I think that's part of it. I think understanding that people live in community. So for me, humanizing the banking is where banks were brilliant in. Let's go back to when they started the proliferation of branches globally. They understood that in their communities, they needed to have a face that was in tune with the local community. So the bank manager was a significant and important member of the local community. He had a credibility, had a kudos. He was thought of as a professional alongside the doctors, alongside the other important teachers, the other community members. If you think about it in the 90s, go to now, and do you know your bank manager? I'm afraid I don't. I have a relationship with several banks, but it's not something that I can rely on as a personal relationship. I wanted to get to the stage where when I do phone up, they know me, they know what I'm doing, they know what I need, just like a bank manager in the 50s maybe used to do for his customers. Learning the best of what we know as relationship management. RM is a commonly understood terminology in banking, but how many relationship managers really nurture and understand the relationships beyond maybe visiting a customer, especially on the corporate side, and offering them the right kind of products and services they need? So I think there's a lot that technology can help us with to stabilize and augment and actually enrich the relationship. You talked about enriching data. Maybe it's actually the relationships we need to enrich. That's what we need to know. And when you're talking about communities of a similar personality, let's say, then I think you have a better chance of having those relationships on a more fundamental, enriched level. So I think my answer to that is yes, I think it's about communities. And the communities can be as small as your families. They can be wider or they can be cross communities. The unfortunate part for a bank is they have to understand that someone like a Colin or a Marcel, our matrix communities are pretty complex. So you've got to understand those dynamics to be real. And that's a very human trait. So I think there's a long way to go, but it's a really interesting perspective, I think, on where the future could be.
You mentioned the sort of proliferation of banking, and sort of the brightest example of that is the 50s. Post-World War era, the levels of unemployment are to the levels of the Great Recession in the US. The Europe is most likely similar. We're just not seeing such a complex view of it, but it's very much similar compared to the previous crisis, where I think this is impacting a lot more people directly. In general, we can definitely say we're right now going through a World War-like event, and we're going to be coming out of that World War event in months or years, depending on country and part of the world. And I mean, on this note, do you see things that banks or financial services institutions can start doing to almost get to that 1950s era with modern technology?
Yeah, let's break it down just a little bit. I think you're right. I think the crisis is undoubtedly something our generation have never seen. So we're in uncharted territories. And I think brushing on the politics, some of the chaos that we see is understandable because no government around the world has had to go through this before. On a personal level, we can learn from history. We can look at 1918. We can look at other crises that we've had, and we can try to learn from those. But it is going to be chaotic, which is a kind of war footing. You're going to have a lot of economic uncertainty, and that's the best that we can offer. The reality is probably, as you say, we're going into a period of economic decline where recessions are going to be deep and potentially damaging long term. So there's a great deal we have to worry about. I think what banks can do, and what they have been doing with the help of governments, is offer practical, tangible support. We've seen governments around the world offer furlough schemes, loan schemes, continuation schemes. The problem being, of course, sustainably, that isn't possible to continue. for more than a few months. So we're left with a position coming into 21 where, frankly, the money runs out, and you will have a situation where there will be those unemployment situations which are unlike any we've seen in our lifetime. That's likely to be the case. So I think banks need to be ready for that. They need to be ready to manage debt in a very different way. We're very deeply involved with credit and debt management for some of our clients. We're also very deeply involved in regulatory and rectification programs globally for some very major banks. And we're advising them that actually we have to think differently about the whole concept of debt or holidays from debt, support for families and communities, support for businesses. I think you just have to show up and recognize that pulling the shutters down on debts is going to cause a huge impact that's going to ripple for possibly generations, actually. So this is not something we should brush over. It's a real discussion. I've got to say, I don't have any silver bullet here. From a technology point of view, I think being open for business and available, pretty much, I think digital technology will trump the branch because it's available 24 hours. So when you have a problem, you can identify a channel to communicate with. The banks have to make sure they communicate in a human way. They have to recognize the difficulties that people are going to be in and respond to them in a nature that's going to look for the future. Because what we don't want is a situation where you get the desperation building. COVID is one thing. What's going to be after that? The potential for that mass unemployment could lead to significant health issues which are elsewhere, significant psychological problems, mental health issues which could be with people for life. And I think personally, there's a responsibility for any institution to step up and help solve that problem. So I think the banks are going to need to try and do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of that bank manager, that teller. I didn't live through it, but at least the romanticism of it that I hear is much more human interaction with the other person. I guess I can remember when I was a teenager, when I first got my account, that interaction was still there. I came into the local branch. I don't remember the lady, but I remember the interaction. It was like, this is your card, this is your account, this is how you do things. If you have a problem, you can actually call me. Like, I'm in this branch, which was located about 5 minutes walking distance from where I lived. So I still had that. It's for sure that those that are now becoming adults, teenagers, they're most likely not having that experience, depending on the part of the world they're in, especially if they're onboarding into something like a Revolut. They're not having that. And I definitely recognize the human positivity of that. So from what I hear you saying, it's a lot about being open to a conversation, as opposed to saying, you took out a loan, it's your problem, go away, like we have our bottom line, which I guess many banks will still need to be doing because they themselves will be running into massive amounts of trouble right now anyway. And the continuity plans will kick in and say, we need to take care of what's there. But yeah, as long as we want to build solutions, it's about actually just being there to talk and explain and say, like, we understand you can't pay it back now, but give us some sort of new commitment that you believe is possible for you right now with your current situation.
I suspect the regulator will be involved in this as well, because the regulator will have an eye to doing the right thing. But it's going to be a really tricky balance. It's like anything. Imagining yourself in the middle of the politics of this anyway. Do you choose the economic benefit or do you choose the health benefit? And the opposite. It's not something I'd want to make that choice on. I'd hope that we could save the economics and save the health of everybody. It seems to me that with this particular situation, it's so tricky and so complex. There's never an easy solution here. And we're going to have to rely on our institutions to be there with us through that. So I think you're right. I think it's about opening up and having those conversations.
Thank you very much, Colin, for your time. This was really fun. And if people want to find you or reach out to you, what's the best way to reach you?
Please come to me on LinkedIn, Colin Payne, you'll find me. On Twitter, it's the same handle.
Perfect. Thank you, Colin. All right.
Thank you so much, Marcel. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow Banking on Air on your favorite podcast platform, because we are back soon with a new episode.